My name is Rebecca Torres. I am 36 and I always believed Thanksgiving was supposed to unite families. For years, I poured my salary into my parents' household, covering the rent, the utilities, the repairs, even while they treated my brother Daniel like the golden child and looked right through me. I told myself that if I kept giving one holiday, they would finally appreciate me. But last Thanksgiving dinner, instead of gratitude, I was told I was not family, accused of resentment, and left staring at faces that had turned cold. What would you do if the very people you sacrificed everything for pushed you out on Thanksgiving night? Stay with me because what followed shook the entire house to its foundation, and you will not believe how quickly the story turned. Let me take you back to where it began. I grew up in a quiet neighborhood on the west side of Columbus, Ohio, in a house that always felt smaller than it looked from the street. It was a two-story place with faded yellow siding that had peeled over the years and a roof that leaked whenever the rain came down too hard. In the backyard stood a crooked basketball hoop that leaned to one side after years of weather, the net torn and hanging loose. That house carried every memory of my childhood, both the good ones and the kind that shaped the bitterness I would carry into adulthood. My dad, Victor, worked for almost 2 decades at the local factory as a line supervisor. He wore his dark green uniform like a badge of honor, and I can still remember the heavy smell of grease and metal that clung to him when he came home late at night. His hands were scarred and rough, evidence of the work he put in, and he walked with the sort of pride that came from steady employment. My mom, Patricia, worked part-time as a cashier at a grocery store. Her job was not glamorous and she never pretended to like it, but she showed up each morning because the paycheck helped cover bills. She would come home with tired eyes, change into her slippers, and move on to making dinner as though exhaustion was simply part of her routine. In 2011, the balance of our family changed overnight. The factory downsized and Dad was let go, despite his years of service. I was in college at the time, but I came home the weekend he got the news. The silence in the living room was thick enough to choke on. Dad sat in his recliner staring at a muted television, the remote slipping in his hand. His shoulders sagged in a way I had never seen before. Mom tried to stretch her paycheck, but no matter how carefully she planned, envelopes with overdue notices began stacking on the counter. At night, their whispered arguments seeped through the walls. It was the first time I understood what it meant for a home to feel unstable. Even before that day, I knew exactly where I stood in my family. I was the firstborn, the reliable one, the daughter who never caused trouble. I followed the rules, studied hard, and stayed quiet. My younger brother Daniel was 4 years younger than me, and he was the shining star in their eyes. If he scraped by with the bare minimum, he was celebrated like a champion. I remember one Thanksgiving in particular. Daniel had just finished the school year with a C average, nothing remarkable. Yet at the table sat a brand new gaming console with shiny controllers and extra games. Mom clapped her hands with delight as Daniel shouted and hugged the box, and Dad knelt down to help him set it up, his face glowing with pride. I stood nearby, holding my report card with straight A's, waiting for someone to notice. Dad glanced over, gave me a quick pat on the shoulder and muttered, "Keep it up, kiddo," before turning back to my brother. That was the moment I learned that doing well would never be enough to make me special in their eyes. It was not just that holiday. Daniel always received more. He got the larger bedroom, even though he was younger. He wore new clothes, while mine came from thrift stores or cousins. At every school event, Dad's voice boomed from the bleachers whenever Daniel's name was called, even if it was for a participation ribbon. When I walked across the stage to accept an academic award, his applause was polite, almost absent. One afternoon, when I was about 11, Daniel came running through the door with a math worksheet, scored at 55%. Mom looked at him, kissed his forehead, and told him he had tried his best. Then she announced we should go get ice cream to celebrate. That same week, I had placed first in the regional science fair, but the ribbon remained folded in my backpack. No one asked about it, so I said nothing. That night, I lay awake staring at the ceiling fan turning lazily above me, wondering why my best never seemed enough. It was around that time I realized Daniel had learned how to play into his role. He acted as though applause belonged to him by default. He interrupted me at the dinner table, and if I objected, Dad scolded me for being too harsh. Mom often said Daniel was sensitive and needed extra encouragement. I was told I was strong enough to manage without it. As the years passed, nothing changed. Daniel's confidence grew, fueled by constant praise, while I became the quiet achiever who knew she would never measure up. I pinned my hopes on the idea that someday my hard work would force them to see me. I thought that when I graduated with honors, they would beam with pride, or that when Daniel failed, they would finally realize the weight I had carried for so long. But recognition never came. When Dad lost his job, the favoritism deepened. Daniel was still in high school, and Mom and Dad poured what little they had into keeping his life comfortable. He went to football practice, came home to hot meals, and still received spending money. Meanwhile, I was juggling part-time shifts at the campus bookstore and tutoring just to cover my books and meals. I told myself they were doing their best, but deep down, I knew the truth. Their best was always reserved for Daniel. Looking back, I can see how that imbalance shaped everything about me. It was not just a phase or a rough patch, it was the foundation of our family. I was the dependable daughter who would always figure things out. Daniel was the fragile star who needed constant support. That truth became the quiet wound I carried into adulthood, the wound that would bleed into every decision I made. It is hard to explain what it feels like to grow up unseen, to know that no matter how much you give, it will never be enough. That knowledge sat in the back of my mind through every success I achieved and every sacrifice I made. And it was the reason why, years later at a Thanksgiving dinner that should have been filled with warmth and laughter, the imbalance would finally explode in a way none of us could undo. When I graduated from Ohio State in 2014 with a degree in accounting, I thought I had finally earned my freedom. I had survived 4 years of student loans, night shifts at the bookstore, tutoring high school students, and endless cups of coffee just to stay awake. My diploma felt like a ticket to something better, a way to step outside the shadow of my family's expectations. But even with that piece of paper in my hand, I walked across the stage already carrying the weight of responsibility I knew I could never put down. Those early years were brutal. Rent in Columbus was high, even for a graduate. And by the time I finished my degree, I had racked up more debt than I like to admit. My friends celebrated with summer trips and internships in Chicago or New York, but I took extra shifts at a restaurant on High Street, balancing trays of appetizers and overpriced cocktails just to scrape together enough to cover interest and payments 2 years later. In 2016, I landed my first real job in Cleveland. Midwest Financial Partners was a growing firm in the heart of downtown, and they offered me a salary that seemed like a fortune compared to what I had been making. I moved into a modest one-bedroom apartment on the east side, bought myself a used Toyota Camry, and thought maybe for once in my life I could breathe. For the first time since I was a child, I felt the flicker of pride in my own stability. That was when the phone call started. At first, Mom would check in with friendly questions. How was work? How did I like the city? Did I meet anyone? Then the tone shifted. She began telling me about late fees piling up, about the furnace that needed repair, about how Dad's unemployment checks had run dry. One evening, she cried quietly into the receiver about how their car might be repossessed. I sat on the floor of my apartment staring at my own stack of bills and felt the guilt rise like smoke in my chest. So I offered to help. At first, it was a one-time payment, just to catch them up. Then it became a monthly rent check, $900 a month. Add $350 for utilities, $550 for the car payment, and suddenly I was covering nearly every major expense they had. By the time I included the smaller things, the family cell phone plan, the internet bill, even streaming services, it totaled almost $28,000 a year. 8 years later, that number would add up to over $200,000, money that could have gone into my own retirement fund or toward a down payment on a house, money that could have let me breathe. Instead, it went into the black hole of my parents' household, disappearing with barely a thank you. Daniel, meanwhile, was living a completely different life. After high school, he wanted to try music production school, and somehow my parents scraped together the money. When that failed, they funded his dream of starting a DJ business. That lasted 4 months before he lost interest. Then came the clothing brand, the cryptocurrency investment group, and eventually a plan to launch a podcast network. Each time he called it his big break. Each time it ended in failure. And through it all, my parents stood by him with unwavering support. I cannot count the times I sat at their kitchen table on visits home, watching Dad brag about Daniel's entrepreneurial spirit, while Mom smiled proudly. They talked about him as if he were destined for greatness, while I sat quietly, the daughter whose steady paychecks kept the lights on. If I mentioned the stress of carrying both my life and theirs, Dad would wave me off. Family helps family, he would say, but it never felt like family was helping me. One night in 2018 stands out more than the others. I had just returned from a brutal week at work, putting in 12-hour days to close the quarter. I drove to Columbus with bags of groceries and 2 envelopes of cash, one for the rent and one for the car. Daniel breezed through the door wearing a brand new leather jacket. He kissed Mom on the cheek and announced that he was thinking of starting a gaming channel and might need some startup money. Mom clapped like it was the most brilliant idea she had ever heard. Dad reached for his wallet to hand him gas money. No one asked how my quarter had gone. No one even noticed I had brought the groceries. That was the rhythm of my 20s. Long commutes, late nights, living in a modest apartment while funneling thousands into a house I no longer lived in. I traded vacations for emergency repairs on their water heater. I postponed buying a reliable car so they could replace theirs. Every raise I earned disappeared before I could enjoy it. I remember sitting with my best. We chatted friend Melissa over glasses of cheap wine in my apartment. She leaned across the table, her eyes sharp. "You do realize they are using you, right?" I laughed it off at first. "They are my parents," I told her. "What am I supposed to do? Let them lose the house?" She shook her head. "There is a difference between helping and being an ATM with legs." I wanted to argue, but her words burrowed into me. The truth was hard to face. Every time I sent money, I told myself it was temporary, that things would get better, but they never did. My parents became comfortable with the arrangement, Daniel became entitled to it, and I became the silent provider, the dependable one, the daughter who could always be counted on to clean up their mistakes. Sometimes I looked at my bank statements and felt sick. $28,000 a year gone, year after year. Vacations skipped, a house never bought, relationships strained because I was always too tired and too broke to invest in anything of my own. I told myself it was family duty, but the resentment grew heavier with each passing year. I was 29 when I realized that I had not lived a year of adulthood without paying their bills. By the time I turned 34, I had given away more money to them than I had saved for myself. And yet, no matter how much I gave, Daniel remained the star. Mom called him ambitious. Dad called him visionary. I was never called anything at all. That was when the word formed in my mind, sharp and bitter. I was not a daughter. I was a walking ATM. And the worst part was, they did not even see it as unusual. It had become my role, carved into stone since childhood. Even now, when I think back on those years, I feel the ache of exhaustion, the long drives, the quiet phone calls, the way I swallowed my frustration until it hardened into silence. I told myself it was only money, that love was worth the sacrifice. But the truth was written in every canceled vacation, every sleepless night, every empty savings account. I was their safety net, their unspoken plan B, and Daniel was their dream. That imbalance, which began in childhood, had only deepened with time, and it was leading me slowly, step by step, toward the breaking point. I never saw coming. It was Melissa who saw it most clearly. She had been my closest friend since college, the one who sat across from me during endless nights at the campus coffee shop, both of us surviving on stale muffins and caffeine. By the time we were in our 30s, she had built a quiet life teaching history at a middle school in Akron, and I had built a habit of driving out to see her once or twice a month. We would open a bottle of wine in her small apartment, curl up on the couch, and talk until midnight. On one of those nights, after I had finished complaining about another unexpected bill my parents had dumped on me, she set her glass down hard on the table. Her dark eyes were steady in a way that made me shift uncomfortably. "You do realize they are taking advantage of you, right?" I laughed nervously, swirling the wine in my glass. "They are my parents, Melissa. What am I supposed to do? Just let the lights get shut off?" She shook her head slowly, like she had heard this script before. "That is exactly what I mean. You think their survival depends on you? It does not. You are the one holding everything together while they keep treating you like the reliable backup plan." I tried to argue, but the words caught in my throat. There was truth in what she was saying, but I had trained myself not to look at it too closely. A week later, she came over to my apartment in Cleveland. I had been saving in a glass jar I kept on the shelf above my desk. Every month after paying my parents' bills, I put whatever small amount I could spare into that jar. A few 20s, sometimes just loose change. It was labeled Emergency Fund in black marker. My half-hearted attempt at preparing for my own future, Melissa walked into my living room, saw the jar, and picked it up. She turned it slowly in her hands, the bills and coins shifting inside. Then she placed it back down and let out a sharp laugh that startled me. "That is not an emergency fund, Rebecca. That is your guilt jar." I frowned, confused. "What do you mean?" She sat down and leaned forward. "You put money in there for them, do not you? You think if you have it ready, then when they call, you can bail them out. That is not savings. That is you carrying their weight before they even ask." Her words stung because they were true. I opened my mouth to deny it, but she kept going. "Every time you put $1 in here, you are reminding yourself that their needs come before yours. That is not family. That is manipulation." I felt my face heat with embarrassment, defensive anger rising, even though I knew she was right. "They are my parents," I repeated, softer this time. "They gave me everything when I was growing up." Melissa raised an eyebrow. "Did they? Did they really give you everything, or did they give Daniel everything while you figured out the rest on your own?" That question hung in the air between us. I wanted to snap back to defend Mom and Dad, but my mind went blank. Memories flickered instead. Daniel's gaming console gleaming under the Thanksgiving decorations, my science fair ribbon tucked away, unseen. The sound of Dad's voice booming for him while I stood on stage alone. Melissa must have seen the change in my expression because her voice softened. "I am not saying you have to cut them off tomorrow. I am saying you deserve to live your own life without being drained dry. At some point, you have to ask yourself when enough is enough." That night, after she left, I sat on my couch, staring at the jar. The word guilt echoed in my head. I had always thought of it as a symbol of my responsibility, proof that I was doing the right thing. Now it looked like a chain, keeping me tied to a family that would never notice the sacrifices behind it. The next morning, Mom called. Her voice was sweet, almost rehearsed. "Rebecca, honey, the water heater has gone out again. It is freezing in the house." I glanced at the jar as she spoke. I could almost feel Melissa's judgment in the silence of my apartment. I transferred the money anyway, muttering to myself that I would rebuild my savings later. At work that week, my manager congratulated me on a project, praising my leadership. My coworkers clapped lightly, and for a moment I felt the pride I had been chasing all my life. Then my phone buzzed with a text from Daniel. "Just got a new gaming setup. You would not believe the deal I found." I knew without asking that Mom or Dad had paid for it. The pride I felt dissolved instantly into something bitter. Melissa invited me over again the following weekend. We sat at her kitchen table while she graded papers and I picked at a plate of crackers. She asked how things were going, and when I hesitated, she looked at me knowingly. "They asked you for money again, didn't they?" I sighed, nodding. She leaned back in her chair, exhaling sharply. "Rebecca, this is not sustainable. You are building a life for yourself. They are adults. They can figure it out." I wanted to tell her she did not understand, that family was different, that I owed them for raising me. But even as the words formed in my mind, they rang hollow. What had they really given me besides expectations? The constant reminder that Daniel's failures mattered more than my successes. That night, I could not sleep. I lay awake, listening to the hum of the refrigerator and the distant sound of traffic. The jars sat in the corner of my room, glowing faintly in the streetlight that slipped through the blinds. I kept seeing Melissa's face when she called it my guilt jar. She was right. It was not just about money. It was about a lifetime of being trained to believe that my worth came from what I could provide, not from who I was. For the first time, I wondered, what would happen if I stopped? What would happen if the next time Mom called, I said no? The thought terrified me, but it also sent a strange ripple of relief through my chest, like opening a window in a stifling room. I turned over and pulled the blanket tighter around me. The question would not go away. Was I truly helping them, or was I letting myself be used because it was easier than facing the truth? The answer felt too heavy to face, so I closed my eyes and let sleep drag me under, knowing that the doubt had already been planted and that nothing would feel the same again. By the time November rolled around in 2023, I had just finished leading the biggest project of my career. Our team at Midwest Financial Partners had delivered a new accounting platform ahead of schedule, and the client's feedback was glowing. My manager called me into his office the day before the company holiday party, showed my hand, and said I had leadership potential. There was talk of a promotion in the new year. For the first time in years, I felt like my hard work might finally translate into something tangible for me, not just for the bills I paid on behalf of others. The glow of that moment barely lasted a day before Mom called. Her voice carried that familiar mix of casual and commanding. "Rebecca, we have been thinking it might be best if you host Thanksgiving this year. The house feels a little too cramped, and your apartment has such a nice layout." I hesitated with the phone pressed to my ear. My apartment was barely large enough for me and a few friends, but I could already imagine her picking apart every corner if I said no. So I said, "Sure, of course, I will handle it." That night, I sat at my kitchen table making a list. Turkey, ham, fresh vegetables, pies, good wine, table decorations. Melissa came with me to the grocery store that weekend. We pushed a heavy cart through the aisles while I scanned for organic ingredients and specialty items. My total at the register came to more than $400. I tried not to wince as I swiped my card. Melissa gave me a look as I stacked the bags into the trunk. "You do realize none of them are going to appreciate this, right?" I shrugged, trying to mask the sting of her words. Maybe this year will be different. It is Thanksgiving after all. For a few days, I allowed myself to believe it. I imagined the table set with candles, my parents smiling at the meal, Daniel actually contributing something more than complaints. I poured my hope into cooking, into planning, into arranging my small space into something warm and welcoming. 3 days before Thanksgiving, the phone rang again. Mom's voice was casual, almost dismissive. "We have been thinking, Rebecca, it might be better if we just do Thanksgiving here at our place. Aunt Rosa mentioned she wants to see the house again, and you know how your dad prefers being home for the holidays." I sat there staring at the bags of groceries I had already started preparing. "But I have bought everything," I said quietly. "I have been planning for weeks." Mom's answer was simple. "Just bring it all here. It will be cozier anyway." After we hung up, I sat at the kitchen counter in silence. $400, days of planning, all of it brushed aside with one sentence. I wanted to scream, but instead I went to the fridge, rearranged the containers, and told myself it would be fine. I would carry it all over. I would make it work. At the office that week, my manager stopped by my desk to ask if I was planning to attend the holiday party. I said yes, but inside I was torn. I wanted to go and celebrate with my team. To show my face in front of the executives might decide my future at the same time I was already drowning in lists for Thanksgiving dinner. When the time came, I stayed late in the kitchen instead, prepping side dishes to transport. Melissa called me that night. She could hear the exhaustion in my voice as I told her about Mom's change of plans. "Rebecca, this is exactly what I warned you about. They move the line every time." I tried to laugh it off. It is Thanksgiving, Melissa. I just want it to go smoothly. There was a long pause before she replied. Smooth for them, maybe not for you. Her words lingered as I scrubbed my counters and packed casserole dishes into aluminum trays. I thought about the project I had just finished at work, the way my boss had looked at me with genuine pride for once. For once, I was being recognized for my effort. Yet here I was again, putting everything into a holiday that would never earn me more than a shrug. Still, when the sun rose on Thanksgiving morning, I loaded my car with boxes, bags, and trays. I tucked the bottles of wine into the trunk, covered the pies carefully with foil, and drove toward Columbus with the radio playing, soft music. The roads were busy with holiday traffic, and I gripped the wheel tightly, rehearsing in my head how I would keep my patience no matter what was said. When I pulled into my parents' driveway, the house looked the same as it always had, a little tired but decorated with autumn wreaths that hung crookedly. Dad's old truck sat in the driveway, and the front window glowed with the light of the living room. I carried the first load of bags up the steps, my arms aching, and knocked with my elbow. Dad opened the door after a long moment, glanced at the bags, and said, "You are blocking the driveway, Daniel. We'll need to park there when he gets here." He stepped aside, not even offering to help. Inside, Mom came out of the kitchen, wiping her hands. Her eyes swept over my sweater dress, and her lips tightened into a smile. "Look at you all dressed up. Some of us have been cooking since 6 this morning." I forced a polite smile and set the bags on the counter. "I brought everything prepped and ready to cook. The oven is yours," she said, already turning back toward her own pot of stuffing. "You know how your father only likes my recipe." I stood there with my carefully prepared trays and felt the weight of it all, the money, the effort, the time, and yet I said nothing. I washed my hands, tied on an apron, and started arranging dishes. Because, despite every warning from Melissa, despite the voice in my head telling me I was repeating the same cycle, I still wanted to believe that if I tried hard enough, this Thanksgiving could be different. That hope, fragile as it was, carried me through the rest of the morning. I cooked, I smiled, I ignored the small comments, and deep inside, I told myself that maybe, just maybe, if I worked hard enough at it, my family would finally see me. The front door opened with a rush of cold air, and Daniel's laugh filled the hallway before I even saw him. He arrived nearly an hour late, his boots thudding against the tile, as if the whole afternoon had been waiting on him. Dad jumped up from his recliner, his face lighting up in a way I had not seen all day. "There he is, the man of the hour." Mom hurried in behind him, arms wide, wrapping Daniel in a hug so tight it almost looked desperate. Daniel shook off his jacket and tossed his messy hair back. He looked every bit like someone walking into a stage set just for him. His voice carried as he announced, "Sorry I'm late. Had to stop by a friend's place to talk about my new business idea." Dad beamed as if he had just revealed a winning lottery ticket. I stood in the kitchen doorway, wiping my hands on a towel, trying to calm the burn rising in my chest. The way they glowed at his arrival was in sharp contrast to the silence that had met me that morning. Daniel dropped onto the couch and leaned back, crossing his legs. "So, I have been working on something big, a gaming streaming platform. It is going to revolutionize how people watch content." Dad leaned forward, nodding as if he were unveiling a masterpiece. "Tell us more, son." Daniel's eyes sparkled. "I have the concept all mapped out. It just needs funding, maybe $35,000 to get the equipment and the marketing launched. But once it takes off, it will be huge. People are desperate for authentic streaming content." Mom clasped her hands, looking at him like he was a visionary. "That sounds incredible, Danny. You always have such ideas." Dad grinned proudly, already convinced of his success. I listened quietly for a moment, my pulse quickening. Then I asked, "What makes it different from the hundreds of platforms already out there? Do you have content creators lined up? Have you researched the failure rate in that industry?" Daniel's smile faltered. He waved a hand dismissively. "I am not worried about competition. Mine will have a unique angle. You would not understand, Rebecca." I took a slow breath. I actually work in finance. I know how investors think. You need more than just an idea. Before I could finish, Mom cut in sharply. Do not ruin Thanksgiving, Rebecca. Let your brother share his dream without all the criticism. The room went silent for a moment, the hum of the television filling the space. I looked at Daniel, who smirked and leaned back on the couch. You know what your problem is, Rebecca? You are so boring. Always safe, always stuck in your little office world. Some of us actually take risks. His words hit harder than I expected. I thought of the nights I stayed up until 2 in the morning working on spreadsheets, the weekends sacrificed to projects, the money I poured into keeping our parents' home afloat. I wanted to remind him of all the times his so-called risks had ended in disasters. The DJ business that never got off the ground, the clothing brand that swallowed thousands of mom and dad's savings, the crypto scheme that left them nearly broke. I could not stop myself. Danny, how many times have you borrowed money and never paid it back? How many projects have you started only to drop them when it got hard? Daniel's face flushed red, his eyes narrowing. That is different. At least I am brave enough to try. You just hide behind your paycheck. Dad's voice rose from across the room. Enough. Stop tearing your brother down. I took a slow breath, my voice calmer than I felt. I am not tearing anyone down. I am telling the truth. For 8 years, I have been paying for this house to stand. $900 a month for the rent, $350 for utilities, $550 for car payments, insurance, phones, internet, streaming, and emergencies. Every year, nearly $28,000. Gone over 8 years, that is over $200,000. Forks froze halfway to mouths. Aunt Rosa's eyes widened, and Uncle Miguel leaned back in his chair stunned. My cousin Elena stared at me as if hearing all of this for the first time. Daniel opened his mouth, but no words came. Mom's face drained of color, her hand shaking as she set down her glass of wine. Dad slammed his fist against the table so hard the plates rattled. You think paying bills makes you family? It does not. Family is about loyalty, not money. Get out. The words hit harder than the sound of his fist. My own father shouting at me to leave the home I had been quietly supporting all these years. I swallowed hard, feeling the room spin. Mom leaned closer, her voice sharp but quiet, meant for me alone. You are just jealous of your brother. You always have been. That was the knife twisting deeper. After all the sleepless nights, the missed vacations, the financial sacrifices, that was how she defined me. Jealous. I pushed my chair back slowly, the legs scraping against the floor. My hands were steady now, though my chest burned with the weight of every unspoken word. Fine. If that is how you feel, then let him pay the $28,000. Gasps rippled across the cable. Daniel's face turned scarlet. He looked to our parents, desperate for them to shield him. Dad glared at me, but the fury in his eyes no longer scared me. Aunt Rosa reached out as if to say something, but stopped herself. Uncle Miguel shook his head slightly, his face clouded with disbelief. Elena sat frozen, her fork still in her hand, her eyes wide. I laid my napkin gently on the table beside my plate. For once, my voice was calm and clear. I am done pretending. I am done carrying the weight and being treated like I do not exist. The room stayed silent, thick with the shock of what I had said. The only sound was the faint whistle of the wind outside and the steady beat of my heart. I picked up my purse, slung it over my shoulder, and looked once at the table where every face showed something different: rage, guilt, shock, shame. Then I turned toward the hallway, each step away from that table feeling like a release I had waited my whole life to take. Elena caught up to me in the hallway, her hand brushing my arm before I reached the door. Her voice trembled, but carried more strength than I expected. Please do not let them make you feel small, Rebecca. We all see how much you do, even if they never say it. Her eyes were wide with worry, the kind of genuine concern I had never received from my own parents. I managed a weak smile, squeezed her hand, and whispered, "Thank you," before pulling my coat tight and stepping out into the cold evening. The air hit me like ice, and for a moment, I just stood on the porch staring at the leaves swirling under the streetlight behind me. Behind me, I could still hear muffled voices rising at the table, but I no longer cared to decipher them. My car sat alone in the driveway, a thin layer of frost coating the windshield. I slid into the driver's seat, my fingers stiff as I turned the key. The engine rumbled to life, and with it came a sob that tore its way out of my chest. I drove through Columbus with tears blurring the streetlights into streaks of gold. By the time I reached the highway toward Cleveland, the sobs had quieted into shaky breaths. Still, I could not face the emptiness of my apartment yet. On impulse, I turned off at an exit and followed the winding road to Riverside Park, a place I had not been in years. The Scioto River was dark and still, the trees bare against the autumn sky. I parked near the overlook and shut off the engine. The silence was deafening. I buried my face in my hands and finally let go, crying so hard my whole body shook. Every word from that table echoed in my head. Paying bills does not make you family. You are just jealous. The weight of 8 years of sacrifice pressed down on me until I felt like I might collapse. A soft knock on my window startled me. It was Melissa, her face pale from the cold but full of determination. I unlocked the door, and she slid into the passenger seat without a word, wrapping her arms around me. "I do not know what happened exactly, but I know you are done," she murmured. "You cannot keep letting them bleed you dry." I wiped my eyes and told her everything. The prayer that never mentioned me, the streaming platform pitch, the outburst, the moment Dad screamed at me to leave. Melissa listened without interrupting, her hand steady on my arm. When I finished, she exhaled slowly. "Rebecca, it is time. You have carried them long enough. They disowned you tonight. You have to let them live without you." Her words settled into me with a clarity I had never allowed before. I thought about my apartment, about the jar on the shelf that Melissa had once called my guilt jar. I thought about every bill that had been drafted from my account, every emergency had solved. While they praised Daniel for his dreams, I opened my laptop right there in the car, the screen glowing in the dark. My fingers flew across the keys as I pulled up my records. Rent, $900 a month, utilities, $350, car payments, $550, insurance, $180, phones, $120, internet and cable, $150, streaming, $45, emergency extras, $200. I typed the totals and added them line by line. The numbers stared back at me cold and undeniable. Nearly $28,000 a year. Over 8 years, over $200,000. My hands trembled as I read it again and again. I could have bought a house with that money. I could have built an investment portfolio. I could have built a future. Instead, I had built nothing but their comfort. And in return, I was told I did not belong. Melissa leaned closer, her voice low but steady. "This is your proof. This is everything you have done. It is time to stop." I closed my eyes, letting the number burn itself into my mind. For years, I had equated sacrifice with love, thinking if I gave enough, one day they would finally see me. But love was never returned, only expectation. When I opened my eyes again, the tears had dried. My chest still hurt, but beneath the pain was something new, resolve. For the first time, I was not just mourning what I had lost, I was beginning to see the shape of what I could reclaim. I shut the laptop gently and rested my hands on it. "I am done," I whispered, more to myself than to Melissa. "This ends now." Melissa nodded, her eyes soft with pride. "Good. It is time you took back your life." We sat in silence for a while, the river stretching dark and endless before us, the cold seeping through the windows. Yet for the first time in years, I felt something close to freedom stirring in my chest. When I finally started the car again, I no longer felt like I was running from the house I had left behind. I felt like I was driving towards something new, though I did not yet know what it would look like. What I did know was simple. The cycle had been broken. The guilt jar would no longer define me. By the time I pulled into the parking lot of my apartment building, the streets were empty, the world quiet under a blanket of autumn leaves. I carried the laptop upstairs, set it on my desk, and sat staring at the spreadsheet one more time. The number still glared back, but now it did not feel like a chain. It felt like a map, showing me every step I had taken and pointing to the place where I would finally stop. I leaned back in my chair and let out a long breath. For the first time in years, I was not planning how to save them. I was planning how to save myself. I turned the laptop back on and opened every account I had been managing for years. The rent was first. I pulled up the auto payment settings, my name listed as the account holder, the payment scheduled for the first of every month. My finger hovered for a moment over the cancel button, then I clicked. A confirmation screen appeared, asking if I was sure. I pressed yes. The weight that left my chest was immediate. Next came the utilities, electric, water, gas, all of them linked to my debit card, all of them quietly draining me month after month. I removed my information, typed in Dad's full name, and forwarded the login details to his email. The confirmation message told me billing responsibility had been transferred. I imagined their faces when the next statement arrived. The car loans were harder. I remember the night I signed the first payment, telling myself it was temporary. I remember Dad handing Daniel the keys like he had earned them himself, while I stood in the doorway with empty hands. Now I stared at the account balance, my name tied to both vehicles with a steady breath. I called the lender, waded through the automated prompts, and finally reached a representative. I explained calmly that I would no longer be responsible and that the payments must revert to Victor and Patricia Torres. She confirmed my request and promised paperwork would be mailed. When I hung up, my palms were damp, but my heart felt steady. Insurance was next. Auto, home, medical, every policy tied to my accounts. I pulled each one up line by line and sent official cancellation notices. I copied Mom on the emails with a short note. You are now responsible for these premiums. I will not be renewing coverage. Then came the family cell phone plan. That one made me laugh bitterly. For years, they had complained about the bill while refusing to drop Daniel's newest phone upgrade. I opened the provider's site, changed the password, and removed every device except mine. I sent another email, service for your numbers will be suspended in 3 days unless you create your own plan. The internet and cable followed. The login showed streaming marathons, late night shows, and endless data usage that I had funded without a word. I deleted my card and removed their devices. For the first time in 8 years, their Wi-Fi would not be mine to provide. Finally, I turned to the home security system. That one had been my idea after a neighbor's break-in 2 winters ago. I had spent nearly $1,000 on cameras, sensors, and smart locks, convincing myself I was keeping them safe. Now I opened the dashboard, exported their settings, and pressed the shutdown button. The screen warned me that all devices would go offline within minutes. I clicked anyway. Through the camera feed, I saw the living room lights flicker once and then go dark. The living room plunged into shadow. The smart thermostat disconnected. The locks reset one by one. The icons grayed out until the house I had protected for years sat in complete silence, powerless and unguarded. I stared at the screen, my breath caught in my throat. It felt like watching the end of a chapter in my life. That house was no longer my burden to manage. My parents would wake to darkness, confusion, maybe even panic. But for me, it was liberation. The clock read nearly midnight when I finally closed the laptop. My apartment was quiet, but not the suffocating quiet I had felt so many times before. This quiet felt earned. I poured myself a glass of water, sat by the window, and watched the leaves falling steadily under the street lamps. For the first time in nearly a decade, there were no payments hanging over my head, no alerts waiting on my phone, no emergencies ready to pull me back into their orbit. The accounts were closed, the ties severed. As I sipped the water, I thought about the words Dad had shouted at me. Paying bills does not make you family. He was right in a way, though not the way he intended. Family is not proven through money, but it is also not destroyed by refusing to be used. I set the glass down, turned off the lamp, and let the darkness settle around me. This time, it was not frightening, it was peaceful. And as I climbed into bed, I knew the real storm would arrive in the morning. The sun was already high when I finally stirred, the faint glow of autumn light spilling through the blinds. My head felt heavy, not from lack of sleep, but from the weight of what I had done. I reached for my phone on the nightstand, and the screen lit up with more notifications than I had ever seen. 43 missed calls, 68 unread text messages, a dozen voicemails. My chest tightened as I scrolled, each notification another reminder that the storm had broken. The first voicemail was from Mom, her voice high and frantic. "Rebecca, what is going on? The power went out, the heat shut off, everything stopped working. We cannot even make coffee. You need to fix this right now." The second was from Gad, his tone cold and cutting. "Whatever game you are playing, it ends today. You have until noon in to restore the accounts, or I am contacting our lawyer. This is elder abuse, Rebecca, and it is against the law." Daniel's voice came next, shrill and furious. "You have ruined Thanksgiving. Do you even realize what you have done? I was supposed to have an important meeting today, and now I cannot even leave the house because the car is gone. You are pathetic, Rebecca. Fix this or do not bother calling yourself my sister." The next message twisted the knife further. Mom, again, her words trembling. "Your father had chest pains this morning. He is at the hospital now. The stress of what you did pushed him over the edge. If anything happens to him, it will be on you. Please, Rebecca, call me back." My stomach dropped, guilt flooding me in an instant. I sat frozen on the edge of the bed, the phone pressed to my chest. Had I really caused a heart attack? Was my father lying in a hospital bed because I finally stood up for myself? Before panic swallowed me whole, another notification buzzed, a text from Elena. "Do not believe what they are saying. No one is at the hospital. They are at the house with police officers. Uncle Victor looks fine, just angry." I let out a shaky breath and scrolled further. Another voicemail, this time Dad again, voice booming with rage. "You think you can humiliate us? I told the officers everything. You have hacked our accounts. You are going to regret this." I opened the security app on my laptop, half afraid I had already lost access. To my surprise, the backup feed I had downloaded still connected. The screen flickered to life, showing the living room of the house I had once protected. There they were, all three of them. Dad, pacing with red cheeks, waving his arms at two uniformed police officers who looked more confused than convinced. Mom sat on the couch, wringing her hands, not a tear on her face, despite the voicemail about crying at the hospital. Daniel stood by the television, arms crossed, scowling like a teenager who had just been grounded. The cameras had no sound, but their body language told me everything. Dad was not sick, he was angry. Mom was not broken, she was pretending. Daniel was not a victim, she was fuming at losing control. I sat back in my chair, the knot of guilt loosening as quickly as it had formed. Their lie had been exposed before it even had time to take root. Another text came through from Elena. "The police are leaving soon. They told your parents this is a civil matter. Everyone is upset, but honestly, they looked embarrassed when the officers did not take their side." I closed my eyes and let the words sink in. Embarrassed? That was new. For years, they had hidden behind me, behind the comfort I provided, behind the image of a perfect family. But now, the curtain had been pulled back. The neighbors would see the police cars, relatives would hear whispers. Their pride had cracked, and I had not even needed to raise my voice. I opened one more voicemail, curiosity pulling me despite myself. This one was from Mom, again, her voice lower this time, almost pleading. "Rebecca, please, the landlord called. They said the payment was canceled. What are we supposed to do? We do not have that kind of money. Just come over, talk this out. We can fix this." Family. The word no longer stung. It rang hollow, stripped of the power it once had over me. I set the phone down, letting it buzz again with another call. I did not answer. For the first time in years, their chaos was not mine. The lies, the threats, the dramatics, they could keep all of it. I turned back to the laptop. the frozen feed still showing the darkened living room. The television was off, the house wrapped in shadows. It was more than a technical shutdown. It was a symbol. The control they had over me, the expectation, the guilt had gone out just as suddenly as those lights. The storm had come exactly as I had expected. But for the first time, I was standing on the outside of it watching rather than drowning. And as the leaves fell quietly outside my window, I realized their lives could no longer bind me. They had lost the power to keep me in the dark. Dad's voice boomed through my voicemail again that afternoon, harsher than ever. He barked that he had already spoken with my cousin Marco, who was a lawyer, and that what I had done could be considered financial abuse. He swore papers were being drawn up and that I would regret humiliating him in front of the neighbors. I stared at the phone for a long moment before pulling up Marco's number myself. We had not spoken in years, not since a family reunion when Daniel had paraded around pretending he had a thriving business while I quietly cleaned up the kitchen mess. Marco answered on the second ring, his voice brisk but not unfriendly. "Rebecca, long time. What is going on?" I explained everything from the years of payments to the dinner table explosion to Dad's threats. When I finished, there was a silence, then a laugh. "Rebecca, your father is bluffing. There is no law in Ohio or anywhere else that requires an adult child to financially support their parents. You were doing it voluntarily. If anything, continuing under those conditions could look like exploitation on their part, not yours." He paused. "And the accounts were in your name, correct?" "Yes, all of them," I replied. "Then you had every legal right to close them. End of story." Relief washed over me so quickly, my knees went weak. "Thank you, Marco," I whispered, meaning it more than I had expected. He cleared his throat. "Honestly, Rebecca, I am glad you called. People have seen the way things work in your family for years. Maybe now it is time the truth comes out." Later that day, Aunt Rosa called. I could hear the tightness in her voice. "The police left hours ago, but the whole neighborhood saw. People are talking. Victor made such a scene. I'm sorry, honey, but you should know you are not the one they are criticizing. It is them." I pictured the squad cars in the driveway, the flashing lights bouncing against the houses on the street, neighbors peeking from behind curtains, whispers forming before the officers had even driven away. The Torres family, the proud family, undone on Thanksgiving morning. Uncle Miguel got on the line next. "You did what you had to do, Rebecca. We all know how much you have carried. Frankly, I am surprised it took this long." The most surprising call came later that evening from Aunt Carmen, my mom's older sister. Her voice cracked as she spoke. "I should have said something years ago. I saw how they favored Daniel, how they leaned on you, but every time I tried to bring it up, your mother shut me out." She went quiet for a moment. "People deserve to know the truth, Rebecca. You have been keeping that family afloat while Daniel drained them dry." Her words struck like a bolt of clarity. It was not just me who knew. Others had seen too. The next day, Rosa and Miguel went over to my parents' house, and Alina later told me what happened. They sat in the living room with Mom and Dad, the air thick with embarrassment. Rosa said firmly that she had watched me bring groceries year after year, watched me sacrifice vacations, and that enough was enough. Carmen backed her up, reminding them that Daniel had borrowed thousands over the years and never once repaid a cent. Daniel tried to protest, but Miguel cut him off. "Everyone knows, Danny. We have watched you spin one scheme after another, while Rebecca quietly covered the basics. You have been lying to your own parents, letting them believe you were helping when it was Rebecca all along." Alina described the silence that followed. Mom's face drained of color. Dad's jaw clenched so tightly he could not speak. And Daniel, for once in his life, had nothing to say. His lips moved, but no sound came. He sat there exposed with no defense left. The image gave me a strange mix of sorrow and satisfaction. Sorrow for the years wasted, for the love I had chased like a mirage. Satisfaction because finally the truth had been spoken out loud, not just by me, but by others who had seen and chosen to stay silent until now. By evening, more messages trickled in, this time from relatives who had heard the story. Some were sympathetic, some angry at my parents for putting me in that position, and a few simply curious. The narrative my parents had spun for years, that Daniel was the golden child and I was the distant one, had cracked wide open. I sat by my window again that night, the leaves falling in soft drifts across Cleveland, and thought about justice. Not the kind you find in courtrooms or contracts, but the quiet kind. The kind that comes when the truth can no longer be hidden, when the lies collapse under their own weight. Daniel's silence at that living room confrontation echoed in my mind. For all his bravado, all his big talk, he had been unmasked in front of the very people who had always believed him. And my parents, who had thrown me out of their Thanksgiving dinner, were now sitting in the wreckage of their pride, forced to face what they had ignored for far too long. The consequences had finally begun, not by my hands, but by the truth itself. And for the first time, I did not feel the need to fix anything. I only needed to let it play out. Winter turned to spring, and the distance between me and my parents became more than just emotional. It was practical, measured in bills they now had to pay and responsibilities they could no longer shift onto me. Word reached me through Elena and Rosa about the changes at their house. Dad had taken a part-time job as a security guard at a warehouse in Columbus. The man who once carried himself with pride about running a factory shift was now standing watch at a gate. Mom had quietly added more hours at the grocery store, her cheerful front at work hiding the exhaustion at home. Daniel, who had spoken so confidently about his streaming platform, had let it dissolve like all the projects before it. Without family money to cushion him, he had taken a job at a retail store, stocking shelves and running the register. The irony was not lost on me. While their lives adjusted downward, mine shifted upward. At the financial firm in Cleveland, my team's successful project earned me more recognition than I had ever expected. In March, my manager called me into his office and told me I was being considered for a leadership position. A promotion that would have seemed out of reach a year earlier suddenly felt possible, maybe even deserved. I poured my energy into work, not because I needed to prove myself to my family anymore, but because I finally wanted to prove something to myself. Outside of work, I made time for healing. I found a therapist in downtown Cleveland who specialized in family trauma. Every Tuesday evening, I sat in a small office with warm lighting and poured out pieces of myself I had never shared before. The anger, the guilt, the endless hunger for validation. Slowly, week by week, the heaviness began to lift. In January, I joined a support group for adult children of toxic parents. Sitting in a circle of strangers who spoke stories so similar to mine was both heartbreaking and liberating. We laughed together about manipulations that once made us cry. We recognized patterns that had kept us trapped. We encouraged one another when doubt crept in. For the first time, I felt less alone. By April, I rewarded myself with something small but meaningful. I booked a weekend trip to Nashville, staying at a boutique hotel near the river. It was the same city where years earlier I had sent my parents for Mom's birthday, footing the bill while they barely thanked me. This time, I walked through the streets on my own, drank coffee at a rooftop cafe, and allowed myself to savor the luxury without guilt. The freedom tasted better than anything I had known. It was during that trip that I met David, a friend of a friend who happened to join us for dinner one night. He was an engineer, tall and thoughtful, with a laugh that filled the room without needing to be loud. I hesitated at first, unsure if I had the energy for anything new. But on our third date, when I finally told him the story of my family, he reached across the table, squeezed my hand, and said softly, "Family is not who you are born to. Family is who treats you like you matter." Those words sank into me deeper than I expected. They reminded me of Rosa's calls, of Miguel's steady support, of Carmen's confession, of Elena's brave honesty. The people who had stood by me after the collapse of Thanksgiving were the ones who deserved the title of family. They checked on me without demanding. They celebrated my achievements without envy. They loved me without conditions. Months later, I still heard occasional whispers of my parents' struggles. They had moved into a smaller apartment. Dad complained often, but he kept working. Mom's health wavered with the extra hours. Daniel still spun stories about new opportunities, but no one was funding him anymore. Their world had changed, and though part of me felt a flicker of pity, I knew it was not mine to fix. Instead, I built something different. I filled my apartment with laughter from friends, with quiet from evenings alone, with the steady hum of a life no longer chained to guilt. My savings account grew, my confidence grew, and with David by my side, I began to imagine a future that was mine, built not on sacrifice for others, but on balance and choice. When I look back now at that Thanksgiving night, I no longer feel only pain. I see it as the moment I was freed. The night the lies broke apart and the truth finally took shape. The night I stopped begging to belong and started choosing where I did. If you have ever faced a family who made you feel less, who took your giving for granted, who confused loyalty with control, know this: you are not alone, and you have the right to step away, to heal, to build something better. I would love to hear if my story resonates with you. Have you ever had to set boundaries with toxic family members? What helped you find your strength? Share your thoughts in the comments. Give this story a like if it spoke to you, and subscribe if you want to hear more journeys like mine. Thank you for listening. Take care of yourself, and remember, real family is not defined by obligation. Real family is who treats you like you matter.